There's this special kind of magic that only exists when you're 14, tucked into a sleeping bag on your best friend's floor. The whole world just shrinks down to the size of that one room, lit by the glow of a TV. The air feels different, you know. It's thick with whispered secrets, the smell of slightly burnt popcorn, and this unspoken rule that, for tonight, the real world doesn't apply. You're in a fortress made of pillows and blankets. You're invincible. My best friend Chloe and I were 14, and sleepovers were our thing. That night was supposed to be just like all the others. We'd built our usual masterpiece in her living room, a maze of mattresses we'd dragged downstairs, duvet covers, and every cushion her parents owned. We were making our way through a pile of cheesy 80s horror movies, laughing at the bad special effects and yelling at the characters for their terrible decisions. Outside, a storm was starting to rumble in the distance, which only made our indoor fort feel cozier and safer. The scrape of a tree branch against the window every now and then was just part of the soundtrack for the night. At least, that's what we told ourselves when the first scratching sound started. It was different from the normal brush of leaves. This was rhythmic, almost ... deliberate. A dry, scraping noise. We just laughed it off. Chloe cranked the volume on the TV to drown it out. But then, during a quiet moment in the movie, we heard something else. It wasn't the wind, or the trees, or the old house groaning. It came from the back of the house. A faint, sharp, metallic click. Section 1. The Fortress of Innocence. Chloe's house was the perfect place for a ghost story. It was this old 2-story farmhouse her family had bought about a year before, sitting on a huge piece of land that backed right up to these dense, dark woods. They were slowly renovating it, so it was always in this state of beautiful, organized chaos. You'd see brand new drywall right next to exposed 100-year-old wooden beams. It was a house with history, a house that breathed and groaned with a personality you just don't get in new suburban homes. For a couple of teenagers obsessed with anything supernatural, it was amazing. That night, her parents were at a charity dinner in the next town over and were two back until late. Her older brother was away at college. We had the whole creaking kingdom to ourselves. The fact that the house was so isolated, which usually made Chloe's mom a little nervous, was a huge plus for us. It meant we could be as loud as we wanted. Our fort was a work of art. We'd made a nest in the middle of the living room, facing the TV. A wall of sofa cushions was our defense against any imaginary monsters, and inside we had everything a 14-year-old could possibly want. Bags of chips, bowls of candy, soda, and a stack of horror DVDs. The first movie was a classic we'd both seen a dozen times. It was comfortable. We recited the lines, pointed out mistakes, and gossiped during the slow parts. The storm outside was getting worse, the wind howling around the old house, and rain starting to patter against the windows. It was the perfect atmosphere. The world outside was wild, but inside our pillow fort, we were warm, full of sugar, and totally safe. Looking back, I realized that childhood innocence is a kind of blindness. You just don't believe that anything truly bad can happen to you. Bad things happen to other people, to characters in movies. They don't happen in a pillow fort on a rainy Saturday night. That feeling of safety is such a fragile thing. We just didn't know it yet. We were still in the opening credits of our own horror movie, laughing, with no idea what was about to happen. Section 2. The first crack in the glass. It was during the second movie that the real world started to creep in. This was a film we hadn't seen. Something from a bargain bin. The plot was whatever, but the atmosphere was actually pretty creepy. The director used a lot of silence and long, tense shots of empty hallways. It was during one of those quiet moments where the only sound was a character's shallow breathing that we heard it. A scrape. It wasn't the sound of a rain-soaked branch. This was a dry, sharp sound, like a dead twig being dragged slowly down the big living room window. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds, and then stopped. We looked at each other. Chloe's face, lit up by the TV, looked just as confused as I felt. "Did you hear that?" "Primera," whispered. Chloe swallowed hard, her eyes glued to the window, which was now just a black, rain-streaked rectangle. "It's just that big oak tree," she said, her voice a little too loud. "Dad keeps saying he needs to trim it. The wind's just scraping it on the glass." It was a perfectly logical explanation. We desperately wanted to believe it. I've read since then that when you're tired and in the dark, your brain starts to play tricks on you. Your hearing gets dialed way up, and it can misinterpret normal sounds as threats. We were tired. It was dark. An old house creaking in a storm was the perfect recipe for a jumpy imagination. We needed it to be the tree. Chloe grabbed the remote. "I'm turning this up," she announced, and the movie's sound filled the room again. We snuggled back into our nest, pulling the blankets a little tighter. We tried to get back into the movie, but something had shifted. The fortress felt a little less secure. The cheesy horror film on the screen felt a little less funny. We were listening now, not just to the movie, but to the night. Waiting. For a while, nothing happened. We started to relax. We told ourselves we were being stupid. It was just the tree. Of course, it was. Section 3. The Symphony of Fear. It's amazing how your brain will lie to you when you're scared. For the next hour, we just built this wall of denial around ourselves. Then the scratching came back. We were halfway through the third movie, but this time, it was different. It wasn't on the big living room window. It was coming from the kitchen window, on the other side of the room. It was the same dry, scraping sound, but now it had a rhythm. Scrape. 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 A 2-second pause. Then again, scrape. 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 It was methodical. Patient. It was not the wind. Chloe and I shot upright. She fumbled for the remote, her hand shaking, and hit mute. The sudden silence was so loud. All we could hear was the rain and our own hearts pounding. We just stared into the dark kitchen. Scrape. 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 "Chloe," I whispered. "That's not the tree." She didn't answer. She just shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. The sound was so deliberate, it could only mean one thing. Someone was out there, trying to scare us, or worse, testing the windows. Then, it just stopped. The silence that followed was electric. We were frozen, just straining our ears. Maybe it was a prank and they'd given up. Maybe they were gone. That's when the new sound started. It was a soft, dull thud. It came from the utility room, a little space off the kitchen with a washer, dryer, and the back door. The sound came again. Thud. Thud. It wasn't loud. It sounded like a shoulder, maybe pressing against the door, seeing if it would give. "The back door is locked, right?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," Chloe breathed. "My dad always locks it. It's an old lock. You need a key." We clung to that thought like a life raft. The door was locked. The windows were locked. We were safe. Terrified, but safe. It had to be some local kids playing a cruel prank. They'd get bored. They'd go away. We were staring at each other, our faces pale in the silent, flickering light of the TV, when we both heard it. It was not a loud sound, but it was the most terrifying sound of my entire life. It was the quiet, unmistakable, and horrifyingly final sound of the old, stiff lock on the back door turning. A soft, metallic, definitive click, the sound of the outside world coming in. For a second, everything stopped. The rain, the wind, my own blood, everything went silent. The barrier was gone. The fortress had been breached. We were not alone. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. I remember this one absurd thought. If I stay perfectly still, I'll be invisible. Then, from the utility room, the slow groan of a single floorboard, a weight settling where no weight should be. We knew this house's sounds. This was a new one. It was a footstep. The footsteps were slow, cautious, moving from the utility room into the kitchen. We could hear the faint scuff of a shoe on the linoleum. the rustle of a damp jacket. Whoever it was, they were taking their time. And then we heard the whisper. It was so faint, just a ghost of a sound, too soft to make out words, a low hiss. But the truly bone-chillingly terrifying thing was where it came from. I've read about how acoustics can do strange things in a building, making a distant sound seem like it's inches away. I think that's what happened, because the footsteps were in the kitchen, a good 20 feet away. But the whisper sounded like it was spoken directly into my right ear. A hot, prickling shock went up the back of my neck. I flinched so hard, I almost yelped. I looked at Chloe and I knew she'd heard it the same way. Her hand was clamped over her ear, her face a mask of pure horror. The intruder was in the kitchen, but their voice was inside our heads. Section 4. The shadow on the stairs, the footsteps in the kitchen stopped. The silence that fell was somehow even worse. We were huddled behind the sofa cushions, our little wall now feeling pathetic. My mind was racing. Called the police. My phone was on the kitchen counter. Chloe's was upstairs. We were trapped. Then the footsteps started again, moving towards the hallway, towards the bottom of the main staircase. In that moment, instinct just took over. The thinking part of my brain vanished, replaced by a pure animal need to run. There was no plan, only panic. We scrambled out of the pillow fort. Loud and clumsy, we crab-walked backward, our eyes locked on the dark archway to the hall. Chloe pointed frantically towards the downstairs bathroom, a place to hide. A lock, but the footsteps were already in the hall. Too close. The only other option was up the same staircase they were moving towards. It was a terrible choice, moving towards the danger, but it was the only way to go. We flew up the stairs, our bare feet silent on the carpet. Behind us, we heard the first heavy creak of a foot on the bottom step. They were coming up. We reached the landing, gasping. Chloe's bedroom door was right there, ajar. She grabbed my hand and pulled me inside, then pushed the door almost shut. Terrified the click of the latch would give us away, she pointed, shaking, at the closet. We dove in, burying ourselves in the back corner, pulling clothes off the hangers to cover us. The darkness was absolute. I could smell the clean, normal scent of fabric softener and Chloe's perfume, a bizarre anchor to a world that was gone. I pressed my face into a sweater, trying to muffle my own breathing, which sounded like a hurricane. My body went rigid. I was totally awake, but I couldn't have moved if the house was on fire. I later learned there's a name for this. Tonic immobility. It's an involuntary paralysis from extreme fear. It's what happens during sleep paralysis, where people for centuries have reported feeling a demon sitting on their chest. They were hallucinating an intruder, but ours was real. Creak, the top of the stairs. Creak. Right outside the bedroom door, we could see a thin line of gray light under the bedroom door. A shadow fell across it, blocking it out. Pair of feet, standing right there. Silence. Just standing there, listening. My heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Then, through the slats of the closet door, I saw it. The brass doorknob on Chloe's bedroom door began to turn. Slowly, deliberately, the latch clicked, a sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. The door was about to open. Section 5. The headlights in the driveway. The doorknob was halfway turned when a new sound cut through the night. A sound from the outside world. The low rumble of a car engine coming up the gravel driveway. And then, a brilliant sweep of light. Headlights sliced through the bedroom, lighting up everything for a split second. The posters on the wall, the dust in the air, and the turning doorknob. Chloe's parents, Tay, Wera, Oma. Instantly, the shadow under the door vanished. The doorknob snapped back into place. We heard a sudden, frantic burst of movement. The footsteps weren't slow anymore. They were panicked. A heavy thudding back down the stairs. A crash from the kitchen, chairs splintering. Then the unmistakable sound of the back door being thrown open, banging against the wall, and slamming shut in the wind. And then, an empty silence. The presence was gone. We stayed frozen in the closet. We could hear car doors slam, keys jingle at the front door, the sounds of salvation. Then we heard her mom's voice, clear and impossibly normal. "Chloe? Honey? We're home. Did you eat all the popcorn?" That's what broke the spell. A choked sob escaped Chloe's lips, then mine. We burst out of the closet, a mess of tears and terror, and practically fell down the stairs, screaming. We landed at the bottom in the arms of our confused and horrified parents, who were standing there dripping with rain. We were safe, but we were not okay. Section 6. The unsolved silence. The flashing lights of the police car painted the rainy driveway in strobing blues and reds. The officers were kind. They listened to our frantic story. They searched the house and the grounds. They found what we knew they'd find. The lock on the back door had been skillfully picked. There were muddy footprints in the kitchen and the utility room. They found the overturned, splintered kitchen chair, but nothing was stolen. My phone was still on the counter. Her mom's purse was untouched. The TV, the silver candlesticks, all there. Nothing of value was taken. Nothing except our sense of safety. That was gone forever. They never found out who it was. The official theory was a botched burglary. Someone who thought the house was empty and got scared off. It was a neat, tidy explanation, but it never felt right. Not to me or Chloe. The slow, patient scratching, the way the person came upstairs. It didn't feel like a simple thief. A burglar wants to get in and out. They don't play games. They don't terrorize. This felt predatory. That night changed me. For years, I couldn't sleep in a room by myself without a light on. The normal sounds of a house settling would jolt me awake, my heart pounding. It was a textbook case of childhood trauma, a hard lesson in how one terrifying night can permanently rewire your brain. I became obsessed. I read about acoustics, about how buildings can play tricks with sound, making a whisper from across a room sound like it is saying your ear. I read about sleep paralysis and the mechanics of fear. Science could explain so much. It could explain why we were so scared in that dark house. It could explain the acoustic ghost of a whisper. It could explain why I froze in the closet. Science can explain the mechanics of fear with chilling accuracy, but it can't explain the click of the lock. It can't explain the muddy footprints, and it can't explain the shadow that stood on the other side of that door, turning the knob. And there's one last detail. The pod. We never told the police, or our parents. The pod Chloe and I only spoke about once, years later, the whisper. It wasn't just a hiss. As our minds replayed it, over and over, we both realized we had heard the same, clear, single, terrifying word. It had whispered my name. If this story left you with a chill, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I want to know, what's your scariest sleepover memory? Share your story in the comments below. I read all of them.